In recent times, the world has witnessed an increase in tensions in various parts of the globe, especially in the Middle East. One of the critical voices that has emerged is that of the political and military leaders who urge caution, reflection, and in some cases, a shift in direction for global powers. Among these voices, a stark warning has come from Malian leader Assimi Goïta. Traoré's warning to Israel and the West must be understood within this broader geopolitical context, where questions about power dynamics, interventionism, and regional stability continue to fuel debates and concerns. The first point that deserves attention is the growing concern that Western nations, particularly those led by the United States and European powers, have historically played a significant role in shaping the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East. The constant intervention in the region, whether in the form of military action, political influence, or economic support, has led to unintended consequences. These actions, intended to bring about peace and stability, have often instead exacerbated existing conflicts, creating new power struggles and fueling extremist ideologies. It is within this context that Assimi Goïta's warning becomes critical. His caution to Israel and Western powers is a call to reevaluate their strategies, particularly regarding their role in the Middle East. Traoré highlights the potential for further instability if these powers continue to act in ways that ignore the complexities of regional dynamics. In his message, Goïta underscores the importance of respect for sovereignty and the need for diplomatic engagement over military action. In the case of Israel, Traoré's warning is particularly significant. Israel's security concerns, especially in relation to its neighbors and the broader Arab world, have always been a central part of its foreign policy. However, the international community has increasingly questioned the nature and impact of Israel's military operations in the region, particularly regarding Palestine. Traoré calls for an end to what he sees as an unjust occupation and an acknowledgement of the rights of Palestinians. He points out that the continuation of such policies only deepens the divide and creates fertile ground for further radicalization. For Western powers, Traoré's warning is a reminder of the unintended consequences of intervention. The West's involvement in the region, while often framed as a means of ensuring peace and security, has been associated with long-term destabilization. The wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria have proven that military action, especially when based on flawed intelligence or incomplete understanding of local dynamics, can create more problems than it solves. Traoré emphasizes that a more nuanced approach, one that prioritizes diplomacy and a long-term commitment to peace building, is essential for avoiding further disasters. At the heart of this warning is the belief that the Middle East's future should be decided by the people of the region, not external powers. While Israel and the West have played influential roles in shaping the political landscape, it is time for them to reconsider their approach and allow for more indigenous solutions to the region's problems. The era of external imposition through either military force or political manipulation must come to an end. The people of the region deserve the autonomy and dignity to resolve their own issues, free from foreign interference. In conclusion, Assimi Goïta's warning to Israel and the West is more than just a political statement. It is a call for a reevaluation of long-standing policies that have for decades shaped the lives of millions in the Middle East. The message is clear. Respect for sovereignty, diplomacy over military intervention, and a recognition of the right of people to self-determination must guide future engagements. The world cannot afford more conflict and instability. It is time to shift course before the region suffers further. Western powers, especially the United States and various European nations, have historically exerted a profound influence on the Middle East through a range of interventions that span military, political, and economic realms. For much of the last century, these external actors have viewed the region as critical to their strategic interests, whether because of its vast natural resources, its geopolitical positioning, or the broader ideological struggles that have played out across the globe. What began as efforts framed around maintaining stability and securing alliances often evolved into complex involvements that reshaped the region in unintended and frequently destabilizing ways. One of the key factors that contributed to this dynamic was the reliance on military interventions as a primary tool of influence. The United States and its allies have repeatedly used military force to achieve political objectives, ranging from regime change to combating terrorism. However, these interventions frequently overlooked the intricate social, ethnic, and religious dynamics that characterize Middle Eastern societies. The result has been the fragmentation of states, the emergence of power vacuums, and the rise of extremist groups capitalizing on local grievances. For instance, the 2003 invasion of Iraq, intended to dismantle a dictatorship and foster democracy, instead unleashed years of violence, sectarian conflict, and regional instability whose repercussions continue to be felt today. Alongside military actions, political maneuvering has played a significant role in shaping the Middle East trajectory. Western powers have often supported certain governments or factions that aligned with their interests, sometimes at the expense of popular will or democratic principles. This approach fostered resentment among local populations who viewed their leaders as proxies for foreign agendas rather than legitimate representatives of their people. The backing of authoritarian regimes in countries like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and elsewhere has complicated efforts to promote human rights and political reforms. It has also entrenched systems of governance that lack accountability and suppress dissent, further fueling cycles of unrest and rebellion. Economic influence has been another important dimension through which Western powers have shaped the Middle East. Control over oil resources has long been a central objective, with Western countries seeking to secure energy supplies critical to their own economies. This focus on economic interests sometimes led to policies that prioritized stability over justice or fairness, as regimes willing to cooperate on resource management were often favored regardless of their human rights records. Such economic entanglements have at times deepened inequalities and contributed to corruption, undermining efforts to build sustainable development and equitable societies. While Western involvement in the Middle East was often justified as a means to foster peace and security, the reality has frequently been quite different. Interventions that failed to account for the complexity of local contexts often exacerbated existing tensions, leading to violent uprisings, protracted conflicts, and humanitarian crises. For example, the aftermath of the Arab Spring uprisings illustrated how external powers struggled to navigate rapidly changing political landscapes, with inconsistent support for democratic movements and sometimes contradictory policies that complicated prospects for peaceful transitions. Moreover, the perception of Western interference has fed into broader narratives of resentment and resistance across the region. Many communities view such involvement as neo-colonial or imperialistic, breeding distrust and hostility toward external actors. This skepticism has made it more difficult for Western countries to build partnerships based on mutual respect and cooperation. It also creates opportunities for rival powers to increase their influence by positioning themselves as defenders of sovereignty and independence against foreign meddling. The history of Western intervention in the Middle East is marked by a complex legacy of good intentions, marred by outcomes that often undermine the very goals of stability and peace. Military actions have frequently led to chaos rather than order. Political alliances have sometimes entrenched oppression rather than democracy, and economic interests have complicated rather than facilitated equitable development. Understanding this legacy is essential for any future engagement in the region, as it highlights the need for humility, a deeper appreciation of local realities, and a commitment to approaches that prioritize diplomacy, respect for sovereignty, and long-term partnership over short-term gains. Without such changes, the cycle of intervention and instability is likely to continue, to the detriment of both the Middle East and the broader international community. Traoré's call for a rethinking of Israel's policies in the Middle East represents a significant and urgent appeal, reflecting a broader concern about the ongoing cycle of conflict and instability in the region. At the core of his message is the insistence that Israel's current approach, particularly its military operations and its occupation of Palestinian territories, needs to be critically reevaluated. This is not merely a political critique, but a call for fundamental change, recognizing that the status quo is unsustainable and continues to exacerbate tensions rather than resolving them. For decades, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been one of the most intractable issues in international affairs. Israel's military actions, often justified as necessary for security and defense, have resulted in significant humanitarian consequences for Palestinians. The expansion of settlements, the imposition of blockades, and frequent military incursions have created a situation where the basic rights and freedoms of Palestinian people are severely restricted. Traoré's warning draws attention to how these policies not only cause immediate suffering, but also sow deep-seated resentment and anger among Palestinians, which in turn fuels cycles of violence and retaliation. The continuation of occupation policies has been widely criticized by international bodies and human rights organizations. These policies are seen as obstacles to peace because they undermine trust and diminish the prospects for meaningful negotiations. Traoré emphasizes that without addressing the root causes of Palestinian grievances, such as the lack of sovereignty, freedom of movement, and access to resources, the region will remain mired in conflict. The persistence of these issues leads to radicalization among some groups, who feel that peaceful means of achieving their rights have been exhausted or ignored. This radicalization then perpetuates a cycle of violence, creating greater insecurity for both Israelis and Palestinians alike. Traoré's position is a call to recognize Palestinian rights as an essential step toward lasting peace. This means acknowledging their right to self-determination, to live with dignity and security, and to have a homeland. Such recognition would require Israel to reconsider not only its military tactics, but also its broader political and social policies toward Palestinians. It implies ending settlement expansion, lifting blockades, and engaging in genuine negotiations that respect the rights and aspirations of both peoples. Traoré's message insists that peace cannot be achieved by force or occupation, but must be built on justice, equality, and mutual respect. Moreover, Traoré's call is also a warning to the international community, including Western powers, to reassess their support for policies that enable or ignore the ongoing occupation. He suggests that external actors have a responsibility to encourage Israel to change course and to support a framework that prioritizes human rights and peace building. This involves applying diplomatic pressure, conditioning aid, and fostering dialogue that includes Palestinian voices. Without such international engagement, the conflict risks becoming further entrenched, making future resolutions even more difficult. The humanitarian dimension of the conflict cannot be overstated. Palestinian civilians, including children, bear the brunt of military operations and restrictions. Daily life under occupation involves hardships such as limited access to healthcare, education, and employment opportunities. Traoré's emphasis on rethinking Israel's policies highlights the moral imperative to alleviate these conditions. Peace is not simply the absence of war. It is the presence of justice and the protection of fundamental human rights for all people involved. In addition, rethinking these policies would have broader regional implications. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict affects neighboring countries and shapes the dynamics of the entire Middle East. Persistent tensions contribute to regional instability and create openings for extremist groups to gain support by exploiting grievances related to the conflict. Traoré's warning underscores that a sustainable resolution would contribute significantly to peace and security, not just within Israel and Palestine, but across the region. Ultimately, Traoré's call is an appeal to move beyond entrenched narratives and hardline positions. It is a plea for a new approach grounded in empathy, dialogue, and a genuine commitment to coexistence. By urging Israel to reconsider its policies and embrace the rights of Palestinians, Traoré points toward a future where peace is possible. This future requires courage, vision, and a willingness from all parties to break free from cycles of violence and mistrust. It is a challenging path, but one that is necessary if the region is to overcome decades of conflict and build a just and lasting peace for all its people. At the core of Traoré's message lies a profound emphasis on the importance of sovereignty and self-determination for the nations and peoples of the Middle East. His call is clear and compelling. The people of this region must be allowed to shape their own futures without undue interference or control from external forces. This principle, fundamental to international law and the notion of justice, is often overlooked in geopolitical struggles, where powerful countries impose their agendas, often under the guise of promoting peace or security. Traoré's insistence on sovereignty and self-determination reflects a deep understanding that lasting peace and stability can only be achieved when the people most affected by conflict are the ones who decide their own destinies. For decades, the Middle East has been a focal point of global strategic interests. From Cold War rivalries to the ongoing war on terror, various foreign powers have exerted influence through military interventions, political manipulation, and economic pressures. These actions have often been justified as efforts to bring stability or protect human rights, but in practice, they have frequently resulted in undermining the authority and independence of local governments and peoples. Traoré highlights the danger of this pattern, pointing out that when outside actors impose solutions without fully understanding or respecting the regional context, the outcomes tend to be counterproductive. Rather than fostering genuine progress, such interventions often create new conflicts, deepen divisions, and erode trust between nations and communities. Respecting sovereignty means acknowledging that each nation has the right to govern itself, make decisions according to its own values and needs, and chart a course toward peace and development without external coercion. Traoré's vision is one in which Middle Eastern countries are not mere pawns in the geopolitical chess game, but active, empowered participants in shaping their futures. This empowerment involves more than just symbolic recognition. It requires the removal of foreign military bases, the cessation of covert operations, and an end to political meddling that destabilizes governments or inflames sectarian tensions. Sovereignty is the foundation on which self-determination rests, and it is through this framework that lasting peace can be pursued. Central to this concept is the idea that the people of the region, whether Palestinians, Syrians, Iraqis, or others, should lead the conversations about their own security, governance, and development. Too often, decisions affecting millions are made in distant capitals, influenced by foreign interests that do not fully represent or understand the complexities of local realities. Traoré's call insists that these conversations belong to those who live with the consequences daily. The voices of local communities, civil society groups, and indigenous leaders must be prioritized over the agendas of external powers. Only by placing these voices at the center of peace processes and political negotiations can solutions be found that are both just and sustainable. Self-determination also implies the right of peoples to choose their own political systems, economic models, and social structures without external pressure. In many parts of the Middle East, external actors have supported authoritarian regimes or armed factions based on strategic interests rather than democratic values or human rights. This has often resulted in the suppression of popular movements and the stifling of political freedoms, fueling resentment and unrest. Traoré's message challenges this paradigm, calling for respect for the will of the people, even when it does not align with the preferences of foreign powers. True self-determination requires allowing societies to evolve organically, based on their unique histories, cultures, and aspirations. The principle of sovereignty and self-determination also extends to the economic realm. Economic independence is a crucial aspect of national sovereignty. Traoré points out that economic policies and foreign investments must empower local populations rather than exploit their resources for external gain. Fair trade, investment in local industries, and equitable distribution of wealth are necessary to build resilient societies that can withstand external shocks and pressures. Economic sovereignty helps prevent dependency, which often translates into political vulnerability and loss of control. Moreover, Traoré's emphasis on sovereignty is a call for international respect for borders and non-interference in domestic affairs. The frequent redrawings of boundaries, military invasions, and support for separatist movements by external powers have created cycles of violence and displacement. Traoré advocates for a regional order grounded in respect for territorial integrity, where disputes are resolved through dialogue and diplomacy rather than force. Such respect is vital for building trust between nations and establishing a stable and peaceful Middle East. Ultimately, Traoré's call for sovereignty and self-determination is about restoring dignity and agency to the peoples of the Middle East. It recognizes that peace imposed from the outside is unlikely to endure, whereas peace built through inclusive, locally driven processes has the potential to transform societies. By allowing the region's inhabitants to lead their own destinies, the cycle of conflict fueled by foreign intervention can be broken. This approach demands patience, humility, and respect from the international community, but it offers the best hope for a future in which the Middle East can thrive as a region defined by its own values and choices, rather than by the ambitions of others. Traoré's call for a shift from military imposition to diplomacy and constructive engagement reflects a deep recognition of the failures that arise when force is prioritized over dialogue in resolving conflicts. Throughout recent history, the Middle East has been plagued by cycles of violence, much of it fueled or prolonged by military interventions and coercive tactics. Traoré argues that this approach has repeatedly failed to bring about lasting peace or stability. Instead, it has often deepened divisions, increased suffering, and created conditions ripe for further conflict. The alternative he advocates for, a renewed emphasis on diplomacy, negotiation, and peace building, is not only more humane, but ultimately more effective in achieving long-term security and harmony. Military imposition, characterized by the use of overwhelming force to achieve political objectives, may produce short-term tactical victories but rarely addresses the underlying issues that lead to conflict. In fact, Traoré highlights how reliance on force can exacerbate grievances, provoke resistance, and alienate populations. When governments or external powers impose solutions through military might, those subjected to such actions often feel humiliated, oppressed, or ignored. This breeds resentment and can drive individuals or groups toward radicalization as they seek to resist perceived injustice. The cycle of violence becomes self-perpetuating, undermining any genuine prospects for peace. Diplomacy, by contrast, emphasizes dialogue, understanding, and mutual respect. Traoré underscores that sustainable peace can only be achieved when all parties have a voice and are genuinely heard in negotiations. This inclusive approach helps build trust, even among former adversaries, by acknowledging their concerns and aspirations. It allows for compromises and creative solutions that military imposition cannot provide. Peace-building efforts that follow diplomatic engagement address not just the cessation of hostilities, but also the root causes of conflict, such as political exclusion, economic inequality, and social injustice, thereby fostering conditions where peace can endure. Moreover, diplomacy encourages patience and persistence. Recognizing that complex conflicts rarely have quick or simple fixes, it requires willingness from all sides to engage in good faith, to listen actively, and to make concessions when necessary. Traoré emphasizes that this process can be difficult and slow, but it ultimately lays a more solid foundation for peace than the transient outcomes of military action. Diplomacy also promotes cooperation in other areas such as economic development, cultural exchange, and institution building, which further strengthen ties between communities and reduce the likelihood of renewed conflict. Constructive engagement through diplomacy also involves the broader international community playing a facilitative rather than dominating role. Traoré warns against external powers imposing their will through military means or coercive diplomacy that lacks sensitivity to local contexts. Instead, he advocates for third parties to act as honest brokers who help mediate disputes, support dialogue, and encourage compromises that reflect the interests of all stakeholders. This kind of engagement respects the sovereignty of nations and the agency of their peoples, empowering them to find their own paths to peace. An essential aspect of this shift is moving away from zero-sum thinking, where one side's gain is seen as another's loss. Diplomacy opens space for win-win outcomes, where agreements can be crafted to benefit all parties and create shared security and prosperity. Traoré stresses that this mindset change is crucial, as conflicts are often fueled by perceptions of existential threat or zero-sum competition. Through diplomacy, adversaries can move toward recognizing common interests and the advantages of coexistence. Examples from history illustrate how diplomacy can succeed where military imposition has failed. Peace agreements, ceasefires, and reconciliation processes in various parts of the world show that negotiations backed by mutual respect and inclusiveness lead to more durable peace. Traoré urges Middle Eastern actors and their international partners to learn from these experiences and embrace diplomacy as the central strategy for conflict resolution. In conclusion, Traoré's advocacy for a shift from military imposition to diplomacy and constructive engagement offers a roadmap for breaking the cycle of violence that has long plagued the Middle East. By prioritizing dialogue, negotiation, and peace building, the region can move toward stability, grounded in justice and mutual understanding. This approach demands courage, patience, and genuine commitment from all parties, but holds the promise of lasting peace and security, goals that cannot be achieved through force alone. Traoré's warning about the end of external manipulation in Middle Eastern politics is a powerful and urgent call that addresses one of the root causes of instability and conflict in the region. For decades, the Middle East has been a stage for the strategic ambitions of foreign powers, whose interventions, both overt and covert, have significantly influenced political dynamics, often with devastating consequences. Traoré highlights how this external manipulation undermines the sovereignty and autonomy of Middle Eastern nations, perpetuating cycles of violence, mistrust, and instability. His message insists that the future of the region must be determined by its own people, free from the heavy-handed influence of outside actors. The history of external manipulation in the Middle East is long and complex. Colonial legacies, Cold War rivalries, and contemporary geopolitical interests have all contributed to a pattern where foreign powers interfere in the internal affairs of Middle Eastern countries. These interventions take many forms: direct military invasions, support for proxy forces, political meddling, economic coercion, and intelligence operations aimed at shaping political outcomes. While often justified under the banners of security, democracy promotion, or humanitarian intervention, the reality has frequently been the erosion of local governance and the destabilization of societies. Traoré's warning underscores the damage that such interference causes, not only in terms of lost lives and shattered communities, but also in the way it distorts the region's political landscape. One of the key problems with external manipulation is that it creates a dependency that weakens regional autonomy. When foreign powers support certain regimes or factions, they often do so to serve their own strategic or economic interests, rather than the welfare of local populations. This support can prop up authoritarian leaders, exacerbate sectarian divides, or fuel conflicts by backing rival groups. The resulting power imbalances undermine the ability of Middle Eastern nations to develop inclusive political systems that reflect the will of their people. Traoré points out that this cycle leads to a lack of genuine sovereignty, where governments become beholden to foreign interests rather than accountable to their own citizens. Furthermore, external manipulation often fuels mistrust, not only between regional actors and foreign powers, but also among the countries and communities within the Middle East itself. When foreign actors meddle in local politics, it deepens suspicions about the intentions of neighboring states and internal groups. This mistrust contributes to the fragmentation of the region, making cooperation and reconciliation more difficult. Traoré warns that as long as external interference continues, it will be nearly impossible to build the trust necessary for lasting peace and regional stability. The covert nature of much external manipulation adds another layer of complexity and harm. Secret operations, intelligence support for militias, and clandestine funding of political movements create environments where transparency and accountability are severely compromised. Such covert actions often exacerbate conflicts under the surface, making resolution harder to achieve. Traoré's warning implies that for the Middle East to move forward, these hidden influences must be exposed and halted, allowing political processes to be genuine and accountable. Ending external manipulation also means fostering a new international attitude toward the Middle East, one based on respect for sovereignty, non-inference, and partnership rather than domination. Traoré advocates for an approach where foreign powers engage with the region not as masters or puppeteers, but as equals and collaborators. This requires recognizing the agency of Middle Eastern peoples and governments, supporting their efforts to solve their own problems, and refraining from imposing solutions that serve outside interests. Such a shift would help create an environment where regional actors feel empowered rather than controlled, fostering ownership of peace and development initiatives. Moreover, the end of external manipulation has implications for global security and diplomacy. The Middle East is a region of strategic importance, and instability there affects the wider world. Traoré's call suggests that sustainable peace in the Middle East can contribute to global stability by reducing the need for foreign military interventions and limiting the spread of violent extremism, which often thrives amid chaos created by manipulation and conflict. A balanced, respectful relationship between the region and the international community benefits all parties by promoting dialogue, economic cooperation, and cultural exchange. In practical terms, ending external manipulation means that foreign powers must cease military interventions, stop supporting proxy forces, and avoid interfering in electoral or political processes. It means respecting international laws and norms that protect state sovereignty and the rights of peoples to self-determination. For regional governments, it means strengthening their institutions to resist external pressures and foster inclusive governance that reflects the diverse voices within their societies. For civil society, it means advocating for transparency and accountability to ensure that political decisions serve the interests of the people rather than foreign patrons. Ultimately, Traoré's warning about ending external manipulation is a call for dignity, justice, and empowerment. It demands that the Middle East be allowed to chart its own course, free from the shadows cast by foreign powers pursuing their own agendas. Only when the region is governed by its own people, for its own people, can true peace and prosperity take root. This vision challenges the international community to rethink its role and embrace a more humble, respectful partnership that supports regional sovereignty and self-determination. Such a transformation offers the best hope for breaking free from cycles of conflict and building a future defined by stability, cooperation, and mutual respect. Western military interventions in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria have profoundly reshaped the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East, often with consequences that reveal the limitations and dangers of relying on force to resolve deep-rooted conflicts. Traoré's warning to Israel and the West underscores these lessons, urging a reconsideration of the widespread belief that military action can bring about lasting peace and stability in complex and volatile regions. His message highlights the unintended consequences that frequently arise when force is used without a comprehensive understanding of local dynamics and without parallel efforts toward political reconciliation and social rebuilding. The interventions in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria serve as stark examples of how military campaigns, even when initially successful in achieving specific tactical objectives, can lead to protracted instability. In Iraq, the 2003 US-led invasion toppled a dictatorial regime, but it also unleashed a chain of events that destabilized the country for years. The dismantling of the Iraqi military and the de-Baathification policies created a power vacuum and disenfranchised large segments of the population. This vacuum became fertile ground for sectarian violence, insurgency, and the eventual rise of extremist groups like ISIS. What was intended as a mission to establish democracy and security devolved into years of chaos, violence, and humanitarian crisis, illustrating how military intervention can aggravate the very problems it aims to solve. Similarly, in Afghanistan, decades of foreign military presence have failed to bring a stable and unified government. The initial goal of dismantling terrorist networks evolved into a prolonged counterinsurgency campaign, with military efforts often clashing with local customs, politics, and power structures. The persistence of conflict and the eventual withdrawal of foreign forces led to the rapid resurgence of the Taliban, underscoring the limits of military solutions in the absence of sustainable political arrangements. Traoré's warning reflects this reality by stressing that external military involvement alone cannot address the complex social, ethnic, and political factors that underpin these conflicts. In Syria, the situation has been even more complex and tragic. What began as a popular uprising escalated into a brutal civil war involving multiple factions and international actors. Military interventions by Western countries, regional powers, and global players have often been driven by competing strategic interests rather than coherent peace-building objectives. The result has been widespread destruction, massive displacement of populations, and a fragmented political landscape with no clear resolution in sight. Traoré's caution here points to the dangers of militarized approaches that ignore the intricate web of local grievances, alliances, and historical contexts that define the conflict. One of the key unintended consequences of military intervention is the humanitarian toll. Civilians often bear the brunt of bombings, ground operations, and blockades. Infrastructure is destroyed, healthcare systems collapse, and millions are forced to flee their homes. These conditions create long-term social and economic damage that fuels further instability. Traoré's warning implicitly calls attention to this human cost and the moral responsibility that intervening powers have to protect civilians and support reconstruction and recovery. Moreover, military interventions frequently lead to the erosion of state institutions and governance structures. When foreign forces impose new political arrangements or support certain factions over others, they risk delegitimizing local governments and exacerbating internal divisions. This weakens the capacity of states to provide security and basic services, leaving populations vulnerable to exploitation by extremist groups and criminal networks. Traoré's message emphasizes that sustainable peace requires building resilient, inclusive institutions that can address the needs and rights of all citizens, something that cannot be achieved through military means alone. Traoré's warning to Israel and the West also addresses the issue of regional spillover effects. Military actions in one country often destabilize neighboring states, creating refugee crises, cross-center militancy, and regional tensions. The conflicts in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria have had profound impacts on neighboring countries, fueling sectarianism, disrupting economies, and heightening security concerns across the Middle East. This interconnectedness means that military interventions are not isolated events, but parts of a broader regional dynamic that requires careful, multilateral diplomatic engagement. Ultimately, Traoré advocates for a shift from military imposition to diplomacy and constructive engagement. He stresses that while military force may sometimes be necessary for defense or counterterrorism, it should not be the primary tool for resolving complex conflicts. Instead, there must be a focus on inclusive political dialogue, reconciliation processes, and addressing root causes such as governance deficits, economic inequality, and social grievance. This approach recognizes the limits of force and the necessity of building peace through understanding, negotiation, and cooperation. In sum, the experiences of Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria demonstrate that military interventions often produce unintended and destabilizing consequences. Traoré's warning to Israel and Western powers calls for learning from these mistakes and prioritizing diplomatic solutions that respect the sovereignty and agency of local populations. Only through such thoughtful, patient engagement can the cycle of violence be broken and long-term peace achieved in the Middle East.